Hey everybody, before we start the show, I wanted to take a moment to let you know about the sponsor for this podcast, Cobalt Press. That's right, Cobalt Press, the makers of such great products. I'm talking about Tome of Beasts. I'm talking about Midgard campaign setting. I'm talking about the Kobold Guides 2. I'm talking about Deep Magic. I'm talking about, maybe you've heard it, Rise of Tiamat. Maybe you heard it, Horde of the Dragon Queen. That's right, these are some amazing products, and now they are hitting you in the face with Al-Qadim genies. That's right, Al-Qadim, the Arabian Nights setting in the Forgotten Realms, is now at your fingertips with 20 new genies, including Minor Genies, Sandstorm Genies, Oasis Genies, Task Genies. There's even a template for Bottled Genies. You need to get your hands on this right now to bring Al-Qadim back to life. It's over there at the DMs Guild. This is an amazing product. It's got great art, great layout, and you know what? Because it's from Cobalt Press, you know everything's been play tested and everything's laid out perfectly and everything's got great rule structure behind it, and it's also original creative content. Wolfgang Bauer and his team are amazing, so you are definitely going to want to check this out because you can get it in both PDF and print on the DMs Guild. So go search for Al-Qadim Genies on the DMs Guild and get all of that good genie goodness up in there. Rub that lamp, make it come out, and it's gonna be amazing. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. Today on the show, I am talking with educator and my good friend Sarah Roman about using D&D to teach English in high school classrooms. Sarah is an inspiration. We met in college and she's been using D&D to teach her students English, and it's just really, really inspiring. She tells the story better than I do, so why don't I get to the interview with her? Okay, everybody, now I am here with Sarah Roman. It is amazing to have you here. A friend from college who is now changing the world and using tabletop RPGs to do it. It is awesome to have you here. I am a huge Sarah Roman fan, and let us make the Tabletop Babble listeners Sarah Roman fans as well. Who are you, and what is it you're doing with tabletop role-playing games?
Well, James, I got to say that we've certainly come a long way from buying comic books together.
Yes.
But nowadays, well, this is my 6th year teaching English. I currently teach over at Raritan High School in Hazlet, New Jersey. I primarily teach junior honors British literature and AP literature. So I am teaching, rigorous courses. We do deal with kind of a heavy curriculum and things like that. But over the years, some of my background kind of pertains to using very experimental learning within the English classes. So prior to this, I'd say for the past 5 years, I've been doing a lot of work with microelectronics in the classroom, things like the Raspberry Pi and Arduino, to do these like really high-tech projects, teaching students coding, teaching students how to view coding as a language, to kind of bring around that technical efficacy that they need these days. But over the past couple years, I've noticed that gamifying the classroom has really been a great treat. In the 2015-2016 school year, I had jumped into Classcraft for maybe half the school year. Usually I like to do something captivating for the students towards the end of the year to keep them engaged, particularly in May and June. So when I had jumped into that, it was great. The students were really into it. It really changed the way that the classroom was running. They felt really involved, and they loved this, again, gamification of the room in that aspect. However, when I was working with Classcraft, I always wanted more. Being a gamer myself in ways where, I've always played stuff like Diablo, World of Warcraft, Elder Scrolls Online. There's always like a little bit more that you want in something like that. I knew as a teacher that there were definitely aspects that we could delve into that Classcraft had left out. And that's what started me thinking about Dungeons and Dragons as an applicable way to teach our books. Now, since I really value that idea of intertwining the text with the game the year after, in the 2016-2017, I started bringing up Dungeons and Dragons to my students as a way to integrate the literature. So it was pretty neat. We kind of had our ups and downs. There were moments where I was saying in my head, for next year, maybe we should leave this out, or perhaps I should ramp this side of it up. But it started to become a really interesting way to immerse ourselves in the books, which is where I'm brought to now, where I've kind of ramped it up, 200%. And we're using Dungeons and Dragons as a way to do in-text campaigns, as a way to teach the literature.
That is amazing. And obviously, I wish that my teachers had latched on to that method of teaching. So how does it work? How are you using D&D in the classroom? And I should mention that if people sort of want to check this out, you actually have some video on your Patreon page that we'll definitely do some talking about later. But people should watch this in action in the classroom, because you've got a whole setup going on that made me not just jealous of your students, but I was like, I want to be in a Sarah Roman campaign. Like, I want you to be my dungeon master. So talk to me a little bit about how you're using it in the classroom.
Well, I think just that I had realized the year before that this was certainly something I couldn't go into particularly half-assed. Like, I had to jump all the way into this if I was going to do it. So in this video, and I'm going to start creating more videos just due, again, to the kind of popularity surrounding this now, you see a little bit of gameplay, but what you'll notice is that I'm starting to dedicate portions of my room to the gaming itself. So I know for my students, a big thing is the tangible. And of course, we see that with people playing D&D all the time. They have maps, they have the minis, they have tangible objects for players to hold, money, all sorts of odds and ends. I said, I know that my students, given their ages, given their interest in the subject, will probably need things to hold on to and things to really visualize, particularly for my visual learners. I couldn't have imagined a case where we were just talking out loud, because, again, that would be very similar to a lecture approach, and that's where you kind of start to lose students and things like that. So as you'll notice, I had jumped into those HeroScape tiles. I had seen these online, and then one of my students suggested that I actually use them for the campaign. So he had brought in a bunch of his old tiles, and they were absolutely perfect, because the way my classroom seating is set up, I have larger tables. So the students sit in groups, and I was like, man, I can set these tiles up all across a table or a couple tables, given how many I have, and that can be their map. So the students have the opportunity to gather around and actually see where their pieces are moving around the map and everything like that. I mean, of course, I can usually use printout maps if I really need to print them out on a large scale, but there's something about having them move the pieces around and really see the landscape that I find very valuable. It's just been super neat. I have the opportunity to play around with my classroom seating. We tend to do arena seating, so all the students can kind of move in and out and see what's going on. Again, it kind of breaks up the monotony of, if you have classrooms where you're sitting in rows or you're always sitting in groups, we have the ability to move around and things like that. So we have those physical aspects, and it's nice for them to be able to touch the materials. I've been working hard to create them, and I'll use air quotes here, backpacks, which are really just white envelopes. But I spent a lot of time laminating cards, like 10 gold pieces, 1 copper piece, and things like that, little items, some of the kits like cobbler's kit and whatnot. And when students earn different money or different items and things like that, I can tangibly hand them those cards so they have a collection of the items that they've accrued in the game. Because honestly, sometimes they forget to write things down on their inventory sheets. And right now, from my classroom management end, it's kind of hard trying to figure out how I do keep track of all those things. I honestly, I have 126 students. So if there is one management issue I am currently facing, is just keeping track of their items. I know the students aren't currently abusing that, and I think it's because they realize that would really kind of lessen the fun for all of us if they just started writing things in. But it is nice for me to try and figure out, okay, well, I do see you have this, so maybe you want to use it in this situation, or I can tailor things a bit better to what they actually are holding, as opposed to seeing what they will apply just out of the gate. So in that vein, that's a little bit of the physicality. I have been, it feels like laminating for eons now. So one of these days I feel like I want like some kind of industrial laminator, which would be super helpful. But the idea here though is, so the first one I really delved into was Beowulf. And what I'm having the students do is I have a really kind of basic premise where the students have to save the entirety of Britain. And it's not just Britain in our present day. It's the idea of every universal Britain that could possibly exist in the past, present, and future. In order to do so, to kind of beat out this evil that's lurking in the background, I have some kind of like evil sorcerer guy kind of, lurking around.
Nice.
They have to beat this guy to all of the literary masterpieces, interact with them, and steal like the prime essence of the literary masterpiece before he does. And in doing so, they have to interact with the characters and complete whatever quests or battle the monsters, whatever it comes to. And that's how they're advancing the overarching campaign. But what it does is it gives me an easy way to say, well, now you're time hopping. And now after Beowulf, well, it looks like we're in 1300s Great Britain because we have to deal with King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. So it gives that overall thread that they understand is going on. But the idea then is when they're working in the micro, they're in these smaller campaigns where they are in old Scandinavia and they are in the 600s and they're talking to Beowulf and Hrothgar and the characters pop up and they have to beat Grendel to keep advancing the story and they have to interact with Grendel's mother. And the nice thing about it is the way I've tailored it is if the students haven't been reading, the quest is going to become incredibly hard for them because they have to be able to interact as the text is. So for instance, with Grendel's mother, they needed a special sword to defeat her. So if the students weren't aware of that, they wouldn't be able to find it. They wouldn't have the perception to be able to do so. And it's pretty interesting. So even aligning it to the text like that makes it pretty fun for them. So they're applying their knowledge in a different way. Like they're like, okay, I know the plot, so I know we need to do this. On top of it, then I give them the opportunity to earn items and gold and experience points by, and I'm probably going to change this in the future, but I put out these things on the map called encounter tiles. So if they walk over it or explore it, I usually have some kind of like mini interaction, but then they get thrown a question about the text. And it could be, again, plot related. I tend to push these more towards like the standard diction, imagery, and syntax because we are already fundamentally dealing with the plot. And that way the students can, open their texts, talk about the book, try and figure out the answer to what it is I'm asking. If a group or a student can't figure it out, other students have the opportunity to answer it. And, and they all kind of keep moving forward. And I like it because my students right now are super tolerant of it. I think they realize that, of course, I need to keep it somewhat related to the text and they need to be learning. But on the whole, they have the opportunity to actually play a game in class. And it's just awesome. We're laughing, we're joking with each other. They get to see a very different side of me and I get to see very different sides of them as well.
So hang on, because this sounds like one of the greatest campaigns of all. Like, this is the thing, is that it definitely has a big emphasis on the novels that it sounds like your class is reading. And it sounds amazing. Like, it sounds like a game I want to play. And this is what's incredible about it, right? Like, hopping through various classic literature novels. I mean, this could be a show on television. Like, this is so cool and so inspired. And if it were me as a student, and granted, I am a nerd and I love D&D and all that kind of stuff, but like, it would make me want to read the literature because I know it is going to be part of the story of our game then, right? So it sounds like if you do the reading, you then have an edge in this game. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, probably a lot of my idea behind that, I don't know if you'd ever watched that old sci-fi show, Sliders.
Oh,
Do you remember? So they were jumping in and out of different worlds. And that's really the idea here. It's truly great. And even pushing out this idea now online and kind of seeing everyone's feedback, I'd posted in some teacher forums and things like that. There's definitely a drive for this because the idea of immersing students in the text, I feel like every English teacher strives for that. And we have these great projects that we put together and peddle out to our students. And we have these really interactive learning moments. But really now we're asking and trying to find ways where we're saying, what is the peak interactivity? And we talk about things like gamification, but ultimately, gamification occurs spottily, right? It's not done every moment in class all the time. Even my game currently, as I'm testing this out in the room, isn't done every day. But as I'm starting to get a bit better at it, I'm realizing that even the writing exercises and things like that can heavily incorporate themselves in. So I started playing around with, and I'll probably use now, not for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, but when we move finally into Canterbury Tales, these moments where the characters are picking up pieces of paper, a quest is given from some kind of NPC or something along those lines, where they have to write for the campaign, but it's still a writing exercise that pertains to class. So it's nice because I'm just modifying writing exercises that I've already had, but now they're aligning right in with what we're trying to do. And I think even the kind of, and it's not even sillier, I was going to say sillier, but the more interesting thing is I've decided to add tables. So for instance, if you roll a D6 and you get like number 4, it has to be like 1.5 pages double spaced in MLA format. If you had rolled a 5, it might have been one page double spaced in MLA format. And then for just to give you a kind of a better example, so you're already rolling for the format, and then I've had tables where it'll list literary terms or devices. So not only are you rolling for format, then you're rolling for the emphasis in writing. So it could be something like onomatopoeia, it could be something like apostrophe or epistrophe or stream of consciousness. And I think, and I'm curious to see how the students adapt to this, because I'm no longer picking the structure and I'm no longer picking the emphasis. It's the roll of the dice, which I don't know what that's going to do in terms of responsibility in the room. I'm curious because it's taking it off of me. They know that while I did give the framework, no longer am I directly choosing what they're getting to write about. So I don't know what the response is going to be in terms of that, but I'm curious to see how they adapt to that kind of idea of now it's random, but it still aligns to the text.
That's kind of an interesting idea. I'd love to hear what the results of the first time you do that are, and how that works out.
As well.
So, a quick couple of questions about your class. What grade are you teaching, or grades are you teaching?
I'm teaching 11 and 12, essentially. So my students range from, I guess, 15 to 18. So with British literature, I feel like this was kind of a give me because we do a chronological survey of British literature. So we go through things like Beowulf, Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, Canterbury Tales, Macbeth, Dracula, and Lord of the Flies, just to name a few. And these are all texts that have just such a glut of knowledge and interesting characters that they seem very, very adaptable for this kind of landscape and this interactivity. Now, with my AP students, this I think is going to be quite the fascinating foray, mostly because we have fewer texts, but we have to delve even further into them and give them more, creed when we're speaking to literary form and function. So this is where I'm going to see how well the more analytical and very critical portion, particularly dealing with language, kind of plays a part in this campaign. I do know as I'm moving into it with them, I'm trying it out with them with Frankenstein, that I feel like I'm going to have some kind of like diction demon that follows them around, that has to really force them to analyze the text in ways, but it also gives them, and again, this idea of emphasis, a very hateable character. So something that I feel like for them would be great to destroy at certain aspects of the game or anything like that. But again, since I'm not quite giving the assignment, I'm curious to see the perception of a different focus, like the person who is giving the work. A lot of things that are curious to me right now. So I'm trying out different, bits and pieces to see how they work in the room.
So with 11 and 12, what sort of RPG experience are kids bringing to the table? You know, I can imagine for me, like 15 years ago, it probably would have been me and like four other kids in the class who were all nerds who had played together, and nobody else would want to. And in fact, again, 15 years ago, I can imagine there would be resistance to it. You know?
I think the resistance level I currently have is pretty low, but yes, there are absolutely students where this isn't something that they're in love with or want to do. On the other end, I think enough of their classmates have bought into it that they're kind of taking it with a grain of salt and a sense of humor, mostly because I think they're tolerating it so much because teachers don't usually do things like this. So, I mean, honestly, the most you can blame me for, I think sometimes, is just that I'm trying too hard to make a project work in the room to make it interesting, or at least that's what I'm hoping they're blaming me for. But yeah, there is resistance for those students, but we do have long conversations about just my motivation for this. How, you know, I feel like they have the opportunity to be someone else. They have the opportunity to try on a different skin, which at this age I think is very important. You know, we're really talking about like, can they for a little bit just be another person, and can they try out things they wouldn't normally try out? Can they interact with their classmates on an even playing field, people they wouldn't normally talk to in the hallways or in the cafeteria and in other classes? Like, can you talk to them here? Can you form bonds that are a little different from what we're used to? So I think they do understand what I'm getting at in that vein. And of course, I do have the students who are really into it. I use them almost as my classroom captains. It's very helpful, especially when we have days where the students are trying to, say, for instance, character build or figure out what they're trying to do. I have backups sometimes in a particular class where other students can jump in and help me out, because in my classes of 24, for instance, I can't be everywhere at once. So it is actually really helpful to assign different roles to students and have them, you know, interact in that way and kind of be my helper.
That's awesome. And it must be so rewarding for those students to say, like, I know a thing, and, you know, I was told this thing would never help me in life, or whatever it is, you know, to be able to have that moment and help someone else out is always a great feeling, I feel like. So
Yes, and you know, they give other students examples of what you can do in the game. So oftentimes they'll put together really complicated actions or ideas in the campaign, but then you can see little lights go off with the students who haven't played before, because they realize, yeah, the sky is the limit in your creativity, and Miss Roman will figure out how to interject whatever you're thinking into the game. Like, she will adjust accordingly. So it's nice to have that level of example when I can't be that level of example. Like, for instance, and it was great, I had them write an essay on Beowulf after we had run the campaign, and I had a student say to me, he said, and he was one who hasn't played before, but he said, you know, I just remember this so much better because we played it. And for me, I mean, I was like, that is what I was hoping for, truly. The fact that you will remember parts of this probably a lot better than you would have if we had just sat down, I lectured, I gave you mini projects, we looked at the book here and there, and then I had you write an essay. So for me, and this was a great moment or a milestone of validation, was seeing their essays on this and their take on the analysis and how they decided to view the text, because I felt like it was just a touch deeper than it normally would have been. I felt like they really felt connected to the text. You know, we'll keep seeing how their writing changes with this connectivity, but I really have high hopes that this is just giving them a new avenue in which to argue and approach the book.
Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Just wanted to take a quick moment to let you know about our sponsor for this podcast, Audible.com. Audible, who provide audiobooks for your ears. They're available on the internet. They've got tens of thousands of titles, and they are incredible. You are going to want to go to audibletrial.com/DSPN right now to get a free month's trial and one free audiobook of your choice. That's audibletrial.com/DSPN. You should check it out. They've got all kinds of stuff. You like fantasy books? Well, you bet that they've got Drisdordan. You bet that they've got Aaron M. Evans' Brimstone Angels Saga. You bet they've got The Lazy Dungeon Master by one Michael E. Shea, aka the DM, host of the DM's Deep Dive on this very network. Check it out right now, audibletrial.com/DSPN for your free month of Audible and your free audiobook download. All right, back to the show.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many students you have in a class, but I know you said you have 126, throughout this year that you're responsible for. Are you the only dungeon master for this group? Like, how does that work?
It's pretty wild. Sometimes, like during certain things I'm describing, after I describe it, they're all shouting at me because they have, just a whole influx of ideas, and it can get a little overwhelming. I feel like now that we've been doing it for a couple months, I really have started to get a handle on how to manage them. And for me, it's a whole different version of classroom management. Oftentimes you don't have students yelling at you all at once with ideas. They'll raise their hands, or they pick up on your cues. And for this, since they aren't raising their hands and we don't know what the cues are quite yet, they do kind of just blurt a lot of ideas. But what I've been doing, I do have one class of 9. They're the lucky ones. So their campaigns, of course, are very similar to what you would see in a normal campaign because there's just 9 of them. So we do have the opportunity to talk a little more, to really flesh out their character actions and things like that. The rest of my classes range from 22 to 26. So that's where, I know, it's pretty crazy. But that's where I've employed more of a grouping method, as you'd imagine. They're working more in parties. I have all the parties roll at the beginning of class to show class order. So I go from highest to lowest. So every day it's different, which is nice to kind of keep break the monotony of the room there. So not every group is always going first and things like that. But I rotate it where, each group or a couple of group members have to speak up about what they're doing as a party. They move their pieces around the board. And this is where I really try and get them into the talking. They're still a little reticent to go into that full active description, but they are speaking up a lot more. I've noticed now as they've gotten more comfortable, they're more willing to explain what's going on. I think there is, for the vast majority of students, that little level of embarrassment of describing these things in front of their peers. But since everyone has to do it, it's starting to take away, I guess, that kind of, fear in the pit of your stomach that your classmates are going to make fun of you for saying something like that. So I basically rotate the groups, and I rotate the students in the groups. So if you notice, or if I notice that one of them is a little quieter or hasn't spoken up about an action in a while, like they have to be the one making the decisions for the group in the next vein or path that they're going down. So it's been working out pretty well. It's kind of a standard group rotation that teachers are used to. I think they realize that, of course, I have to heavily modify it. I do tend to push them towards the finality of an action if it's taking too long, if the description is taking a little bit too long. But sometimes I let it go depending on the room investment. There have been times where a group has decided to do something very complicated, very interesting, but you can tell that the rest of them are like locked in. Like they want to see how the roles go. They want to see what the next step is going to be, how the monster is going to interact with them and things like that. So it's really kind of knowing your students and playing to what they want to hear and maybe don't want to hear in that moment.
That's a really, really magnificent job you're doing. It's funny, you said your smallest class is 9. A group of 9 players would make me run screaming in the other direction. It's so many, right? So let me ask you then this. Are you seeing, you said you've been teaching for 6 years, which makes me feel very old. Are you finding that using D&D in the classroom is driving student engagement? Are you finding that the students are getting more into the actual content they're supposed to be learning?
Yeah, I had wondered about that for a couple months, as always. And I always want to have some kind of like qualitative thing to say to my supervisor or anyone who's interested in finding out more. And I was curious about the motivation, whether or not they'd be more engaged. And honestly, the past week we were winding up to we have a fall break right now. And with my British honors, we had to jump the campaign now into, like I had said earlier, the 1300s Great Britain, because we're dealing with King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. We're doing Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Now that is a shorter text, so I didn't want to do a full campaign, but I did decide to do this MMO aspect to the Dungeons and Dragons bit, where
cool.
Yeah, it's because you do have passive listeners, as I had addressed before, and you want the students to stay engaged. And I'd really been rolling around, how do I keep them working or wanting to work while other students are playing and are kind of talking out maybe longer things? So I got in my head to do like town building, where they complete passively certain kind of like rote English standard things, where they're building their grammar, punctuation, mechanics by, I don't know, working on worksheets or kind of answering problems or going through little mini quests that they have in this town. So they have these buildings, right? Like the blacksmith, the Fletcher, the leather worker. I think I'd put in 10 or 12 for each class. The groups had to pick 2 or 3 that they wanted to work on, and they had to mirror this town and its NPCs, all of its inhabitants, and the NPCs' quest hooks off of the history and what they have found out through research about 1300s Great Britain. So it gave me a way to back end the typical research we would have to do about that time period and the Knights of the Round Table and things like that, because they realized like this town has to flourish in that vein. So what they're doing is skill building, and every time that they complete like a series of passive assignments, it gets put towards their towns. So right now, all of the buildings and little shops and everything, they're all level 1. So when they complete a certain amount, they'll go to level 2. And level 1 buildings only sell like what I have determined to be level 1 items in the game. So fewer things than what you'd get from a normal shop. Like the adventuring gear isn't as extensive. The blacksmith does not sell, for instance, like chainmail out of the gate. There's like a lot of smaller items. Same with the leather worker and like the temple and things like that. So the students know that there are other things they can certainly access, but they actually have to work towards those things. And it's interesting because I do believe it's going to start creating a bit of a classroom competition, because they're going to be able to see each other's towns and who has access to what. So if somebody has, a level 3 blacksmith, in Canterbury Tales, that's going to far outweigh, the weapons and equipment other people in other classes will be able to have almost at the same stage in the story. So I'm curious to see how that develops, but it does give us a nice passive way. And I will then address the motivation. Having them create their own shops and shopkeepers and NPCs and these NPCs with like little quest hooks and things like that made them crazy. I saw them really want to draw, really want to think. They got to add their own flair to everything. They got to, name their NPCs, give them backstories, give the shops relevant backstories. So they're creating this whole town's history, and they're doing it based off of what I need them to be basing it off of, which is excellent. And just to see them have so much fun just creating like that, and for me to have this idea that, of course, they're still researching and they're still learning what I need them to be learning, really felt great for me this past week. I mean, so much so when the kids were leaving one of my classes, I high-fived them all on the way out because I was just so impressed with what they had managed to do in that class period. And, they were excited too. So there are parts now, like as we move through that, I know are going to generate a lot of excitement. And it's really nice to see them finally add their own flavor to the world that I'm trying to build with them.
Wow, that is huge. You're a game designer. You realize that, right? Like
right now, yes.
That is amazing, and the work you're doing is just so incredible, and it sounds so fun and engaging, and like I said, it would make me want to read the books that I felt like in high school I had to read, right? This would make me want to read them, which I think is just so great. Did you have any hurdles when you asked the administration about this? Obviously, Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s and 80s, we think about the satanic panic coming around, and it was going to make kids into Tom Hanks in Mazes and Monsters, and they were going to go crazy and things.
Mhm.
Like it, and obviously, I think particularly in the last couple of years since 5th edition D&D has come out, the stigma really does seem to be washing away from the hobby, which is great. Did you face any challenges because
Um,
it's a little unconventional?
I haven't mostly, and I mean, God bless my supervisor. Get, she fields a lot of my ideas, which I can't even express to you what it's probably like for her, because there will be some days where I just kind of walk into her office and I'll talk off the top of my head about these wild ideas I have about the classroom, and then she'll see me go quiet for a little bit and I'll come back with more ideas and things like that. And she always has the opportunity to kind of steer me on track. She's been working with me for, I feel like maybe it's been 4 years now. So I think she's pretty used to me trying things that are out of the box. Like I'd said, I'd done a bit of that kind of experimental learning with the microcontrollers and microelectronics and whatnot. So I think in ways it was actually probably a relief to see me go back to the literature, like fully back to the literature, where the students are dealing with pen and paper. I know we are in a one-to-one classroom, but there is value with them handwriting and working and drawing and things like that. And really just delving into a text as opposed to almost maybe not splitting my room, but maybe 3/4 of it dedicated to English and a quarter of it dedicated to technical skill and knowledge. So I feel like they're more invested because they're seeing that, of course, gamification is a tried and true theory going on right now. I know with the microelectronic stuff, that was pretty niche because you don't often find educators that have that skill set where you can say, yes, I can absolutely teach English literature and I can absolutely help you code this and build this, kind of robotic thing with all the circuitry and electronics and stuff like that. So right now it's been great. They always pretty much back me in everything that I have. I imagine that some schools wouldn't have that opportunity. I think it really depends on the environment, and they're very, very forward thinking. Their whole mantra is, helping students achieve 21st century skills and really crafting them into these college ready, wonderful young adults. So you see that from the top down in my high school. And I think that's why I do really have the opportunity to play around and do really exciting things in my room.
That's really great. So there's two things that I picked up on that. One is, and if people haven't picked this up yet through this interview, you clearly care about your job, you clearly care about your students, you clearly care about education in general. And it sounds like you're always trying to maximize the time you spend and the time the students spend with you to make sure that everyone is engaged. And it's also great that you have a supervisor who is engaged as well and open and willing. I could see my mother is a teacher as well, or she retired. But
I meant to say that before. I was going to say, wasn't your mom a teacher? And I was right, and I should have said it, but continue, yeah.
so I know, and she worked at all different places, had great supervisors where she felt supported, and they would listen to her ideas, and she loved to do new things. She taught elementary school, and she wanted to really engage kids, and other supervisors who would just say, just stick to the old way of doing it. Like they essentially were phoning it in, right? So it's great that you have a supervisor too who is just as engaged and passionate as you are. That is incredible. So as you're evolving your plan and your method here, do you think you're going to continue to use D&D in the future in your classroom going forward?
I do. I really like this one. The year before, I'd felt a little iffy about it. And I think it was just, how sometimes with ideas, you get really stuck in a rut. You feel like it has to be this way. And if it isn't this way, it isn't going to work. And I think I had these kind of rut moments where I felt like I just wasn't looking at it the right way. I just couldn't quite figure out how it should be in the class. And I don't know. I feel like over the summer and kind of thinking at the beginning of this year, I felt like I had a coming to the light moment where I said, you know what, we got to take it even a step further. I think I was dancing around a little too much with this idea of going back and forth in the room between the standard teaching and incorporating the game, which, like I was saying before, you can't just do this half-heartedly. So I said, whatever, we're going to do it. Let's just jump all the way in and see what happens. And I had given the warning to the students, like, if this isn't working out, we're just going to can it. It's, always remember, I run this room. If you don't like it, if you feel like this is a terrible kind of thing to do in here, we absolutely can fix it. So I think that idea of lightness, this idea that it wasn't permanent, also gave them this feeling of security there, where they knew that if this really went south, they had the opportunity to change it with me, and we could find something better to do. I do feel that even next year when we try it out now, especially because I am feeling comfortable with the campaigns that I'm developing for the class, I have a better idea of how to act in front of them, how to talk to them, how to walk them through a lot of odds and ends. It's giving me a lot of options and ways that I can approach this. And, it's nice even for the community, because I've noticed that since word had gotten around that I was running this in my class, I did have a lot of students that I don't know, from other, grades and other classes kind of pop out of the woodwork to ask me if I wanted to do a D&D club. And of course I said yes. I mean, when students come forward and really ask for things like that, you always want to be able to say yes. I'm already after school so much. I do Odyssey of the Mind, which is like a creative problem solving kind of club.
Cool.
I don't know. It said to me, if I have so many students invested in something like this and wanting to try it, I may as well kind of continue doing it. I hope as we grow and figure more and more of this out, that it will be a very useful mechanism. I mean, as of right now, it is. I'm working heavily to chart the progress of the students and comparing, of course, grades and qualitative measures to what I saw last year, just to kind of keep numbers on it. Not that that's always easy, but I'm hoping that overall in the kind of grand trajectory of the year, it does show that they have definitely taken a lot more from the text than they would have usually.
Nice. Wow. That is just amazing and really cool. I really wish that you had been my teacher in high school. That is incredible. So we should talk a little bit, because I was talking about you on Twitter and the work you're doing, and Greg Tito, who is the marketing manager over at Wizards of the Coast, who runs the D&D official podcast, saw the tweet and he said, "Oh, I'm so glad you're giving Sarah Roman a shout out. I love her so much. And I also see on your Patreon, you talk about working with Wizards of the Coast. So, and I know that you may not be able to share every aspect of your relationship with them or anything, but how did you start working with them, and how is that going?"
Well, James, I can't remember what I had asked you, but you had pointed me towards Greg, I think well over a year ago.
Oh,
and
I totally forgot
you
about
did.
that. Sorry,
You did.
I set you up to talk about me.
No. But you had. I think I had been kind of asking around at the time, who can I contact or who can I talk to about this? And you had seen one of my posts offhandedly and then directed me to him. And then I don't think I ever talked about it again. Like, I went quiet on it. And when I had talked to him initially, he was very supportive. He had actually sent out a bunch of handbooks and like a Dungeon Master's Guide and a Monster Manual and
That's awesome.
all these different notebooks and stickers for the kids and all sorts of things to get us started, which was awesome. That was actually the most valuable gift I've ever received from a company. Just all of these handbooks. I mean, those are not cheap. They aren't.
Yeah.
And I mean, and that's probably now my new battle is, the school ordered me some, but ideally I would always want like a classroom set, which, if I'm looking for 30 of them, that's kind of where you see me, I think, peddling myself out on Patreon and stuff like that, because the money isn't, for me. There are, of course, little things where, yeah, of course, I want access to a database, or I'd love to buy this new critical companion to a text, but everything else I want to dump into the room. I mean, those HeroScape tiles those are crazy expensive. And, I'm trawling eBay to find the best prices on those, and even more handbooks or just other, tangibles, of course, to get the students more immersed. So that's kind of where I am with that. But again, incredibly valuable thing he had sent along and really helped us out. And then from there, I had just kind of run with it. I think again, like I'd been quiet for maybe almost a year on it. I'd finally reached out back to him at the beginning of this year because, I said, look, I solidified this a lot more. I feel better about it. I want you to hear about the ideas and kind of my experiences I've had with this. And, he loved it. And what I hadn't known was, and I think they have been rolling around for some time, is incorporating Dungeons and Dragons more into the classroom. So I think they felt like it was a great time to maybe talk a little more about, how that might look. There's another teacher I have conversations with. His name is Cade Wells. He's a teacher over in Texas.
Oh yeah, yeah. He was
He
on their podcast, right?
Yeah, and he's been doing really incredible things in his classroom. I believe he teaches ninth grade, and he kind of takes a different spin on it. I know that he's more like structurally using D&D. He uses it for like a lot of writing projects, using the adventurers as a way to start off stories and start off different writing pieces and stuff like that. So kind of different from how I do it, but it's still so interconnected. So he and I have been having a lot of fascinating conversations about, the use of this in the classroom and different ways that we're kind of envisioning this going. I know that there are probably hopes that this can jump off the ground and be something that's very useful. And I think that's just probably now the best thing I've been having is talking to the two of them and kind of seeing like where we might want to go, what things are we thinking, how can teachers use these different ideas and things like that. I mean, and as you've probably seen me posting now, is I had gotten a lot of feedback and interest from other English teachers, and I decided wholeheartedly to just jump into writing my own adventures. Like you saw that I had kind of developed a Beowulf campaign. Well, I said, what will happen if I develop an adventure that a teacher who is unfamiliar with D&D can pick up and run and can use portions of, and it's pretty much, as any teacher tends to want, something when it's pre-made gives you everything that you're looking for within the book itself. So I'm kind of changing it to cast a more critical eye for teachers on it. So they have an interspersion of writing exercises. They already have question tables set up, all different like tips and tricks that they could use in order to run that particular adventure. I'm hoping that, and what I think is so valuable about Dungeons and Dragons is that it can be turned into anything. I mean, right? It is something that is so verbally based and based in the imagination that when you want to apply it to something else, it has that fortitude. It already has all of its mechanics and things ready to go. So it's really just, how do you want to mutate this to fit, your preference? How do you want it to fit the room? How do you want to fit classroom management into this? How do you want to do essentially X, Y, and Z? And I think that's really the impetus behind what I'm up to right now, is just, I see this opportunity. I see that teachers do want it. I think a lot of the times they just don't know where to start. So I'm hoping in ways to kind of fill that gap and get people back into something like this, because the imaginative process here and the creative process with it is just staggering when you really think about it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much. That is incredible that you're thinking, that you're writing adventures that other teachers will be able to use in their classroom and adopt this method that you're creating. Which so you really, I mean, you are really a game designer if you're writing adventures. That is incredible, and it might even be a thing like that. Could be a thing I could see groups at the table playing, or family sitting around to review Beowulf if they want to before an exam or something. Like there's a lot of different uses you could get out of an adventure like that, aside from the amazing fun it would be to go up against Grendel,
Yeah. And I just got to say, and I have to just, of course, throw out there to just validate it a little more. It's not as though I'm topically going through Beowulf or approaching it even half-heartedly. And I don't imagine that I would do that ever for these adventures, because I've been spending an incredible amount of time researching. I mean, at this point in my life, I feel like a true researcher of Beowulf. I mean, I've spent time going through critical articles, all sorts of critical viewpoints offered by, a variety of professors or people who have spent their life studying the text. And what I'm hoping is that I can kind of condense a vast majority of these critical views into the adventure so that while they are navigating through it, they don't realize it, but they are learning like just all of these viewpoints that have been compiled into the text itself. So I know foundationally, my hope is to really create something that is valid and true to the text, as opposed to, and oftentimes you'll see just treatments where, you know, the storyline is there, but it's not anything that has value when you peel up the layers to look underneath.
That is really, really cool. And that sounds like a big, substantive, meaty product. I would call it a product. You would probably call it like a lesson plan or a learning tool.
Yeah, like a learning tool. Yeah, yeah.
That's true. I'm putting it into my capitalist, greedy game designer speak. But that's really awesome. So if people want to find out more, if they want to see what you're doing, if they want to support what you're doing, if they want to mail your school a player's handbook because maybe they have an extra one, where can they go? What can they do?
Ooh, well, right now, currently, and I didn't mean for it to be like this, but my Patreon page probably has the most collected information about it. Honestly, this week I have to go over my school website and my business website to really reflect what it is that I'm up to. My school website is www.abildungsroman.com, ABILDUNGSROMAN. I know that's a little complicated, but it is the technical name for a coming of age device. And I thought it was pretty funny that it had S Roman at the end. So I use it for everything now. Unfortunately, since it is hard to spell, I probably would have picked something different if I had put any thought into that. So, but you can definitely check that out where I update about what we're doing in class and so forth. And I mean, right now, that's about where I am. Of course, you can always follow me on Twitter. The handle would be exactly the same, Abildungsroman. And you can kind of see my daily or weekly updates about where I am with my writing process and what we're doing in the classroom. Great place to see pictures if that's what you're looking for.
Excellent. Well, we will link up everything to over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, which is a long URL but easy to spell, so that people can check it out and they can go to your website and watch you give a TEDx talk, which is also really fun for me. So it's just a really great thing you're doing, and you're building the hobby, but you're also shaping young minds and helping them get to know some really great literature and just teaching them, you know, very, very important lessons, I think, about creativity and writing and imagination that I feel like we forget as we become adults. So this is just excellent, excellent work you're doing. Thank you so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble, Sarah. I really appreciate it.
What a great conversation. Sarah is incredible. I really, really wish that I had a teacher who taught English using D&D when I was a kid like that. Speaking of great English, if you leave us a 5-star review on iTunes, I will read it out loud and credit the person who left it. You can make me say anything you want. Even if you don't use iTunes, you should know that most podcatcher apps use the iTunes algorithms to recommend and review and rate podcasts to other people. So, you know, go ahead and sign up for a free iTunes account. Rate us, rate all your other favorite podcasts. It'll take you about 30 seconds, and we will be very appreciative. Today's 5-star review comes from Squatch, and the review is entitled The Greatest. Now, there's something you should know about Squatch. Squatch is Jeff Greiner of The Tome Show, an amazing D&D podcast that you should go listen to. You should stop what you're doing, hit subscribe on The Tome Show right now. I got my start thanks to Jeff, working with him on The Tome Show, which is one of the greatest D&D advice, news, reviews, and interviews podcasts out there. And Jeff is a heck of a guy. The crew he puts together with Tracy, with Sam, with Mike Shea, they got all kinds of great people over there, so check that out. This is not the review, by the way. This is me saying this. Let's see what Jeff wanted to make me say. So Jeff's review is entitled The Greatest. It reads, "There once was a man from the Tome Show. He went off and started his own, though. It's a cast, really great, so I gave it a rate. Everyone should give it a go-go. Thank you so much, Jeff. This is an amazing review, and I am super duper duper happy that you have left this for us. And we'll have to get you back on the show soon. Be really fun. All right, people. Well, I want to recommend a podcast on DSPN to you as well. If you haven't checked out Dames and Dragons yet, what are you doing? Dames and Dragons, great show. Actual play. 5th edition D&D, got lots of jokes, lots of fun, and an amazing story from Kat, Caitlin, Sophia, and Noelle, who were on this show just a couple of episodes ago talking about comedy. So check that out. All right, people, you can follow me on Twitter at James Introcaso, and you can check out all the things I'm doing in the wonderful world of game design at worldbuilderblog.me or .com, whatever. I got both now. Woo! I feel like a Kennedy. Crazy. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network, thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by BattleBards. Remember that RPGs are like sex. It's okay to make it up as you go along.
Gather round, travelers, to hear our tale.
A mysterious organization called the Sisters of Sorrow have swept up our 3 heroes, and it is up to Kara, Saye, and Arnadel to do battle with the forces of evil and financial destitution.
We shall battle with ancient lore.
Take them down with our sharp reflexes.
Hey, did you guys finish the last of the ale?
Venture Maidens is a Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition actual play podcast featuring a cast of 4 lifelong gamers.
Kara, not now. We're recording a podcast ad.
Right. I chop it with my axe.
For gold and glory.
We post our episodes every other Sunday. We've got monsters, treasure, role-playing, a cool plot, and some strange NPCs. Find the Venture Maidens podcast today on iTunes or wherever podcasts are free. Until then, venture away.